Hey there, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to share a book review on Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. I wrapped up this read a few months ago, and it's one of those stories that just won't let go. It's such a beautiful, heart-wrenching, and thought-provoking story. So I'm going to talk about some of my takeaways. If you've read it too, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. And if you haven't, I strongly recommend adding it to your reading list. Well, the story revolves around the life of Charlie Gordon, who is a mentally disabled man with an IQ of 68 or something. His world is forever altered by a surgery that aims to increase his intelligence. The experiment had previously been successful with a mouse named Algernon, and Charlie becomes the first human subject. And by the way, the novel is presented as a series of progress reports written by Charlie, so that kind of gives us a front row seat to his evolving thoughts and emotions. At first, all Charlie wants is to become smarter because he thought that will make people like him and be friends with him. However, as his intelligence skyrockets to genius levels, he finds himself lonelier than ever. And apparently, his emotional development does not match the intellectual growth. Alongside this intellectual awakening, he uncovers some painful memories from his past, including his turbulent relationship with his family and his childhood traumas. And all of this raises the question of whether there's a trade-off between knowledge and happiness. And then the story takes a heartbreaking turn when Algernon, the mouse, experiences a sudden decline in its intelligence. And that makes Charlie wonder if his own intellectual ascent might also be temporary and whether he could share Algernon's tragic fate. So that's basically the summary, the storyline of Flowers for Algernon. And I guess we can now delve into some of the philosophical themes that runs through this novel. I like to start with the Plato quote at the very beginning of this book. Anyone who has common sense will remember that the bewilderments of the eyes are of two kinds and arise from two causes, either from coming out of the light or from going into the light, which is true of the mind's eye quite as much as of the bodily eye. The quote is taken from Plato's Allegory of the Cave, found in Book 7 of the Republic. So the Allegory of the Cave depicts the process of acquiring knowledge, and in this allegory, a group of prisoners has been confined within a dark cave since birth, and they are unable to see the outside world. Their legs and necks are fastened, forcing them to face a wall and restricting them from turning their heads. They can only see the shadow of objects cast on the wall by a fire behind them. And these shadows represent a limited and distorted version of reality, but the prisoners mistake them for the only truth. And then one day, one of the prisoners is liberated from his chains, and he is compelled to stand, turn, look, and step towards the source of light, that is the fire. Eventually, he is dragged out of the cave into the sunlight. Initially, the intensity of the sunlight pains his eyes. When he is informed that the objects around him are real, while the shadows he once perceived were mere reflections, he cannot believe it because, after all, the shadows had seemed clearer to him. But gradually his eyes adjust, allowing him to contemplate reflections in the water, view objects directly, and ultimately gaze upon the sun. And it is through this process that he comes to the conclusion that it is the sun that produces the changing seasons and years and controls everything in the visible world. With a sense of responsibility, he returns to the cave to share his knowledge with his fellow prisoners. However, he finds that he is no longer accustomed to the darkness, and his fellow prisoners consider him to be foolish and blind, and they resist any attempts to freedom, and they believe the journey outside has impaired his judgment. So that's basically the allegory of the cave, and I feel that this is a prominent theme that runs through Flowers for Algernon, because if you look at the story, much like the prisoners who are confined to a world of shadows, Charlie begins with limited intellectual abilities, and he lives in a world of intellectual darkness. And when he undergoes that surgery to enhance his intelligence, he's like the prisoner that's being dragged out of the cave. And his newfound intelligence exposes him to a broader reality, and he struggles to adapt to this newfound brilliance and also the complexities of the world. And as Charlie's intelligence continues to expand, he begins to see the limitations of his farmer life. He questions the validity of his previous perceptions, and he even feels frightened to realize that the scientists who had conducted the experiment on him are just ordinary people who don't know all the answers, instead of the geniuses he had believed them to be. And just as the liberated prisoner feels a duty to return to the cave and free others, Charlie also feels responsible to share his knowledge with those who remain in the shadow, but his attempt is met with resistance and misunderstanding, and he becomes increasingly isolated from others who cannot relate to his experience. And also, as what's suggested in Allegory of the Cave, that those who have gained knowledge and insight should not laugh at those who are still trapped in darkness. Charlie also feels he has to guard against the natural tendency to look down on others now that he has surpassed them. And by the way, I think the story also makes us reflect upon the limitations of human intelligence, because despite Charlie's transformation, he realizes that his heightened intelligence has its boundaries. I remember there's a sentence like, "A short while ago, I foolishly thought I could learn everything. Now I hope only to be able to know of its existence and to understand one grain of it." So this resonates with the idea that the more we uncover, the more we grasp the vastness of the unknown. And also the scientists behind Charlie's surgery are portrayed as ordinary people working blindly, often grappling with failures. However, I think that's exactly how science progresses, isn't it? Because in many ways, we all dwell in the shadows. We are unable to fully comprehend the ultimate truths of the universe, but it is the quest for knowledge, the willingness to confront our limitations, and the dedication to lead others out of darkness that characterizes the progress of science and civilization. And the second thing I want to talk about is how the book makes us reflect upon the relationship between intelligence and happiness. At the start, we meet Charlie as this kind and gentle guy who just wants to be smarter. He thinks that will help him connect with people and make friends. But things get complicated after the surgery. For instance, he comes to a painful realization that his co-workers at the bakery, whom he believed were his friends, were in fact making fun of him. And also, Charlie's own character undergoes a profound transformation. The once friendly and compassionate Charlie becomes incapable of forming connections and empathizing with others. He becomes a flawed and unhappy person. So all of this raises an important question. Does being super smart mean you cannot be happy? I think we might find some insight by revisiting Plato's The Republic. In The Republic, Plato introduces a framework for understanding the human mind by dividing it into 3 parts: desire, which relates to our wants and cravings; spirit, which is linked to our emotions and passions; and understanding, representing our capacity for rational thinking. And the idea is that a well-ordered soul is one in which the third part, understanding and rational thinking, is in control of the other 2 parts. So when intelligence and reason guides our desire and ambitions, it leads to the truest and highest form of happiness. Charlie's newfound intelligence makes him aware of the complexity of human relationship and the world, but he struggles to manage his emotions effectively. And I think this emotional turmoil contributes to his increasing isolation and unhappiness. And I think there's a sentence in the book that goes like, intelligence without the ability to give and receive affection leads to mental and moral breakdown. So I guess that's what Daniel Keyes wants to say about the relationship between intelligence and happiness. And finally, I think the story also leaves us with an essential ethical question. How far should science go in its pursuit for knowledge and human enhancement? For instance, should it go so far as to enhance human intelligence through brain surgery? I think we've seen in the story that Charlie is so determined to safeguard his pre-smart self, and he said he was authentically human prior to his surgery. And this brings light to the ethical complexity surrounding medical research, and especially the experimentation on human subjects. Okay, so I think we've explored the allegory of the cave, the intricate relationship between intelligence and happiness, and also the ethical challenges that our scientific exploration faces. But of course, I mean, we are still left with a lot to ponder. I highly recommend reading this book if you haven't already. And if you have, share your thoughts in the comments below. What other themes or insights did you find in Flowers for Algernon? Okay, that's all I got for this book. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you soon.